Another dramatic day of developments in former President Donald Trump's so-called hush money trial.
The highlights include Trump's gag order and back on the stand, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. Michael George has more.
Former President Donald Trump left the sixth day of his criminal hush money trial fuming that he's stuck in a courtroom instead of on the campaign trail like President Biden.
He's out campaigning and I'm here in a courtroom sitting here sitting up as straight as I can all day long, because you know what? It's a very unfair situation.
Tuesday, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker returned to the stand. He testified that during a 2015 meeting with Trump and his fixer Michael Cohen, he agreed to be Trump's eyes and ears, suppressing stories that could hurt Trump's 2016 run for the presidency. Pecker detailed 3 stories he bought just to kill, including an apparently false story about Trump fathering a child out of wedlock, and Trump's relationship with former Playboy model Karen McDougal. McDougal claims they had an affair in 2006.
I have an unconstitutional gag order by a highly conflicted judge.
Before testimony resumed Tuesday, Judge Merchan heard arguments about possible gag order violations. Prosecutors say Trump commented about potential witnesses 10 times on social media. The judge appeared frustrated with Trump's attorney's attempt to explain the posts, eventually telling him, "You're losing all credibility with the court."
That's just another way of saying, I don't trust you. Where's your precedent? Where's your facts?
After the hearing, Trump posted on his social media platform, "This is a kangaroo court, and the judge should recuse himself." Michael George, CBS News, New York.
Now, the judge hasn't ruled yet on the possible gag order violations. Testimony resumes on Thursday. Joining us live today to discuss is attorney, former prosecutor Rick Convertino. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So this is going to go on for a while, and I think for some people there's a slight misconception as to what the former president is really accused of. The crime he is accused of is not paying hush money, but that's sort of the crux of the issue. Can you break down what the issue is when it comes to falsifying business records and lying about that payment, allegedly?
Sure. The crux of the case is as you said, or the gravamen of the case is the lie, or the cover-up. And the key to this case is that the falsification of records, business records in New York State, is a misdemeanor, unless the falsification is used to cover up a felony or to divert from attention from that. So that's what this case is all about. The use of the catch and kill is not a crime. It's evidently a common thing among some newspapers, some rags as they call them. But in this case, the use of that to cover up a scandal which would impact the election is what the felony is. So it's kind of bootstrapped. You see this in RICO cases all the time, traditional organized crime cases where there's a underlying misdemeanor, such as gambling or prostitution. They're misdemeanors in and of themselves, but because they're a part of the RICO, the ongoing enterprise, they become felonies. And it's a similar thing here. The underlying case is a misdemeanor, but because it's used to cover up the scandal, to affect the election, it becomes a felony in New York State.
The former president, of course, is saying that this is just another witch hunt. Considering the timing of the presidential election, do you think he's in some ways right, or is there a legal basis for this case?
Oh, there certainly is a legal basis for the case, and I think that given the facts as I've seen them and read about them for now almost a year, and the way it's going so far, it appears that there's going to be a conviction in this case. I think the only other outcome other than a conviction in this case is going to be a hung jury, 1 holdout, 2 holdout. This is a perfect case for a holdout juror because the juror can garner national, international attention. And so that's the other outcome, I think, is that less likely, but I think it's a distinct possibility. One of the things that's interesting that it's a unique look at this, I think, is the purpose for using the National Enquirer. And we talk about, as you said, Shana, it's not a felony. It's, the use of a cover-up story or the catch and kill is not a crime in and of itself. But one of the things that Trump does, I'm from New York, grew up in New York, and have been exposed to Trump for years. And this is what he likes to do. He likes to seed stories. Used to be in the New York Post, a lot of the other rag newspapers like the National Enquirer, and then he uses the story that he plants as a cudgel to batter opponents with, use it as a source, or uses as a way to promote himself. In other words, he creates the story and then uses the story that he created as a basis upon which to self-promote or to damage another person. And that's exactly what he did in this case. He used the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer put out a story, as ridiculous as some of them were. You remember Ted Cruz's father was alleged in the National Enquirer to have been part of the assassination of JFK. Trump calls into Fox and he says, hey, this is the story. This is, outrageous. It's incredible. You ought to look into it. So he creates his own story and then promotes it, self-promotes it, and separates himself from the story and says, the story is out there. I'm just using it. He does that now in court when he comes out of court with a stack of stories, newspaper articles that he says, look at all these articles. Well, those are articles in, suspicious sources. And so that's his modus operandi, and that's what he's been doing for decades. And that's what he did here, starting from that meeting on August 15th, 2015, between Cohen, David Pecker, and himself. And they created this conspiracy to create stories to punish or to pejorative stories about opponents that he could utilize, and also stories that would promote himself. A lot of the comments that have been made that I've listened to over the last couple of days are that Trump's defense is that he wants to say that I did this to protect my family and protect myself and my brand. Well, as those of us who have ever run for office, there is no separation between your brand or your family or personal stories and your election. They're all one and the same. And so I think that'll be a feckless defense.
His attorneys are arguing that there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. That isn't that what every candidate is trying to do, is influence people to vote for them. Is there any chance that holds water, do you think, with the jury?
Well, this goes far beyond attempting to influence an election or to get stories out these stories were false. I mean, that was a part of it. He'd use Cohen to create a false story, a false narrative. Then he would use David Pecker to, as David Pecker said, he would embellish the story, the false story. And in fact, when there was a story that was false, where the doorman was alleged to have had information regarding an illegitimate child sired by Trump, that they determined that was a false story, they said, well, even if you let that run, wait till after the election. And so that has nothing to do with protecting his brand or his family. He was okay with having that story run, but just after the election. And that goes to prove, I think, that all of this was to influence the election, which is the underlying felony.
As an attorney with experience in cases like this, how damaging would you say these allegations are to someone's brand?
Critically damaging. I mean, it used to be, I remember back in the day when if you were bald and ran for office, that was a negative. If you were divorced, Ronald Reagan, I think, was the first divorced president, and that was scandalous. And so those are, compared to what we see now, it pales in comparison now. So the electorate in a large regard, I think it's all baked in, as they say. This is Trump, this is who he is. You either support him or you don't. And I think that there are many people that just, there's a way to synthesize or to evaluate this information, and that's through your own personal lens. And I think that's what we're seeing over and over. There is just a large minority, which is about 36% or so, that no matter what, as Trump says, he can shoot somebody on Fifth Ave and get away with it. I think that's relatively true.
Well, we have a lot of testimony yet to listen to in this trial, several weeks to go, and early on in this election year. Rick Convertino, as always, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you. Thank you both.